At this particular meeting, it started well, clear goals, good momentum. The team had a certain energy. But 15 minutes into the meeting, the news dropped. We've hit some slippage and some work won't ship until the next quarter. And this wasn't the first time. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a sort of familiar wariness. The question that was on my lips was, what's going on? Something still baffles you somehow. A sense that forces are at work that you can't quite see. Let me try and shed a little bit of light on that. In my case, a few months before this disappointing news, I'd presented at the All Hands. There were a couple of hundred people watching. And there I laid out the vision, walking everybody through the roadmap, trying to make it clear why all of this matters. And my power was somehow up there on stage, but power was also in the audience. It was in the hands that will either drive the whole thing forward or let it fail. The talk ended and people stood up, started checking their phones, and then drifting back through the building to their desks. And I think this is the moment. This is where leadership actually happens. Not in the moment of declaration up on stage. It's in the thousands of tiny moments that happen afterwards. Most leaders don't see this split clearly enough, in my opinion. But power is the mechanism through which change happens. It's not vision or strategy. It's power, and specifically the ability to redirect an organization from what it is doing now, today, towards what needs to happen tomorrow. And until you own this fully, you're leading with the handbrake applied. Now, going back to the all hands, it's finished. And someone on my team has returned to their desk and they've opened up their laptop, looking at their task list. Now, in their task list, there's the work that aligns with what I've just said on stage. Let's say it's the new API integration. But there's also a request from finance and an email from sales asking why an old feature has stopped working as it should. And then there's a message from a colleague, and she thinks that the whole plan that I've presented on stage a moment before is mistaken. And this particular person's calendar shows a meeting in 10 minutes with the infrastructure team. And infrastructure have only just found out that their systems are all going to need to change. This is the moment where my power either flows through the organization or can pool uselessly somewhere and just not go any further. And my team member has to choose. Will they open that conversation with the infrastructure team and start pushing through the inevitable resistance?
Or will they avoid the conversation because it's too much trouble?
Will they reach out to sales and explain that the old feature isn't a priority, even though they know that the sales team are going to complain? And will they use their power, not mine, to drive this agenda that I've presented forward? Or will they take a path of lesser resistance and let my vision very quietly disperse whilst appearing busy? I think this is where most leadership fails. Not on the stage with a big presentation and the lights, but at someone's desk. And what's the tool that most people reach for first? Well, not everybody, but certainly many. It's some form of dominance. And dominance doesn't work here. Yes, I could mandate and I could gently threaten, and I know I have at certain times, not necessarily deliberately, but subconsciously. And I think the consequences of that is that I create a certain fear that builds momentum, and short term, it would move things. But fear corrodes the very thing that you need from people. They need to be willing to think and problem solve for themselves. They need to bring their full capability when you're not watching. And when people leave work at the end of the day, their reasons for working, their motivations, what's driving them, are their own. We assume that our motivation somehow transfers when it doesn't. So when someone hits resistance, when the colleagues that they encounter push back, and when priorities conflict, people ask themselves, is the change that my leader, my boss, wants us to reach tomorrow worth the tension it's going to cost me in the next meeting? And I think this is the moment where a leader's power has to be somehow authorized, and not by the board or by the job title that I've got, but by the people doing the work. Everyone who has to navigate the turbulence of change when I'm not in the room. So here's what I want you to take from this. First, power is your ability to make it happen. And your ability to exercise power depends on the strength of the relationships that directly surround you. This would be, of course, your executive leadership team or your direct reports. Second, leadership power depends on relationships throughout the organization. You can have the clearest vision in the world. You can communicate the why brilliantly. But if the relationships themselves aren't strong enough to carry that message through the reality of implementation, what you get is a kind of bland mediocrity. And third, relational power doesn't feel like real work, and you should notice this, because that's why it doesn't show up on the roadmap. It gets left for people to work out for themselves. And you're paying a price for that, a much bigger price than you realize. I know this with conviction because I've delivered a lot of products and services in my career. And the teams that took large steps in short time frames and delivered results that mattered, what did they look like? Well, they had a kind of psychological mental strength. And it came from a lot of factors. In particular, direct dialogue and an embracing of conflict. There was real collaboration, no performed version, but the real version, where people could name tension without the room freezing. Most teams that I've worked in simply do not have this. They deliver, yes, they're capable, yes, but they're underperforming relative to what they're able to do. So what can you take from all of this? I think the next time you're in a meeting and you think to yourself, what is going on? Ask if people feel tension in the room. You don't need to explain it or justify it. Just ask them to name what it is. Because tension is a resource, and it's information about where the system is straining, and in particular, where your power is not reaching. And if all of this is left undiscussed, you leave the handbrake on. You're squandering the potential sitting right there in front of you. I hope you like this video. Please like and subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment.